One of my favorite things to do at the moment is just scroll through the internet and find the weirdest, wonkiest outfits from the world's vast military history. In my opinion, uniforms symbolize the time period in which they were made. They can show creativity, ingenuity, and provide a window into history, and I just love that. As someone whose historical knowledge has come from the public education system for the longest time, I was shocked about how many types of unique uniforms there were. Most people are aware of the basic overview uniforms. These would be those from World War II, the American Revolution, and the American Civil War. That is where most people's knowledge stops. As I have become more knowledgeable about lesser-known parts of military history, I have begun to find outfits that I didn't even know existed. So for today's video, I have decided to make a list of my top 10 favorite obscure military uniforms throughout history. I really hope you enjoy. Number 1. The American Zav. Some military units in the American Civil War were very unique. And that is the best way to describe the Zavs. With an outfit that featured red baggy pants, a tasseled red fez, white leggings, and a red trim jacket, the Zavs really stood out in a war where soldiers primarily wore plain blue or gray jackets with trousers. One of the questions I had when I first saw this strange uniform was who in their right mind would create something so stupid yet so amazing at the same time. I knew the answer before I even looked it up. The French. In the 1850s, American newspapers began running wildly popular stories about the Zouave Battalion, a French unit that fought to protect France's colonial holdings in Africa. American journalists really over-romanticized the actions of the Zouaves, making them out to be superheroes who defended women and children and brought peace and justice to a barbarous land. The American public quickly became obsessed with these flamboyant heroes, so much so that when the American Civil War began in 1861, both sides began immediately raising Zouave units. The Zouave uniform was made for a warm climate and rugged terrain, so it's easy to see how it was not the best suited for North American warfare. Also, when you take into account how expensive and hard to find the fabric for the outfit was, it made it incredibly impractical. This is why many units wore variations of the uniform, or were just Zouaves in name. The Confederates quickly abandoned the idea a year or two into the war, but northern units, mostly from New York and Pennsylvania, persisted throughout the entire conflict. The Zouaves made use of fast-paced skirmishing and proved to be excellent soldiers. I did not know this, but Zouave units participated in every major battle in the American Civil War. And it was not until 1879 when the last unit retired their uniform. Though the Zouaves looked utterly ridiculous, I think they really added style to a dark and bloody war. So for that reason, I love the Zouaves. Number 2. Tlingit body armor. The best way to describe the Tlingit tribe is North American Vikings. Located along the southeastern Alaskan panhandle, war for the Tlingit people was an ideal way to gain slaves and resources. They accomplished this by traveling hundreds of miles across the Pacific Northwest, taking anything they could get their hands on. One of the ways that helped them achieve complete dominance on the battlefield was by wearing elaborately crafted armor made from wooden slats. They also wore helmets with wooden visors that depicted native animals or their ancestors. Thick leather tunics were also worn for added protection. This creative armor made the Tlingit look like North American samurai, and I think that is just the coolest thing. My personal favorite fact is that some of the armor was made with Chinese coins stitched into them, which gave the tribesmen extra protection against firearms. It also can't be understated that the psychological effect that the armor had was immense. Just imagine trying to go up against foes whose helmets added 6 inches to their height, and wore armor that did not make them look human. One of the Tlingit tribe's biggest enemy was the Russians, who wanted the vast natural resources of Alaska and were willing to get them by any means necessary. Now I want you to guess who would win in a fight: a powerful European nation with access to modern firearms, or a small Native American tribe that primarily used knives, bows, and spears? The answer is the Russians. But saying the war was a total defeat for the Tlingit would be a severe overstatement. Russian accounts tell of how their bullets were harmless against this strange people's armor. After years of intense fighting, the Tlingit were able to push the Russians from their homeland, and the armor sure did help. While studying the tribe, I was disappointed to find out that the armor was not used as often as one would think. It was reserved for more strategic occurrences, but still, it's pretty cool. The armor shows the ingenuity of the Tlingit people, and surprisingly, it still continues to be largely overlooked in today's age. With the advancements of more effective firearms, the armor became useless. The tribe also took significant losses when European disease came and decimated their populations. When Russia sold Alaska to the United States in 1867, Tlingit land was ripe for the taking, but the tribe still lives on today and continues to use their glorious armor in tribal ceremonies. Number 3. The Winged Hussars. The Winged Hussars look like a unit from Game of Thrones, but believe me when I tell you, they were real. This Polish heavy cavalry unit was active from 1503 to 1702 and was renowned for their bravery on the battlefield. The uniform they wore consisted of half armor, which provided better mobility, and flapping metal wings, which they wore on their back. The purpose of the wings was to make a whole bunch of noise. In theory, this would cause panic among the enemy ranks and turn the battle in the Poles' favor. The wings, though, were hardly ever used because of how difficult they were to wear, but still, I think they're really cool. The Winged Hussars, whether they had their wings or not, did participate in some major battles, though, the most famous of which was the Siege of Vienna, which took place in 1683, where the largest cavalry battle in history took place, and resulted in a successful effort to drive the Ottomans from Austria. Though the Winged Hussars probably never really wore their wings, I still find them cool, even though my expectations were completely shattered. Number 4. The pre-Civil War Kentucky National Guard. The Kentucky National Guard is really obscure when you consider broader American history, and I would not even remotely be interested in them if it was not for their weird choice in uniforms. For some reason, they thought it would be really cool to wear bearskin caps, similar to those worn by the Queen's Guard today, along with a typical pre-American Civil War dress uniform. I could find no information on why this strange uniform choice was made, so I can only assume that they just thought it was cool. The National Guard at this point in time was more of a social club, where everyone would go to the fairgrounds and drill for a day, so there was nothing really military about it. When the Civil War started, Kentucky dissolved the National Guard, and its members served for both sides. That is all I could find on them, so that's why I decided to add them into this list. Number 5. The 95th Rifles. This has to be one of my favorite uniforms ever. The 95th Rifles were a highly specialized experimental unit of British sharpshooters that were the first to use rifles in a time when the musket dominated. Their uniform consisted of a dull green coat and a black belt. They were actually the only British regiment to wear green, while everyone else wore the typical redcoat attire. They did this because by wearing green, the 95th was able to blend into the environment more effectively. That helped with their primary job of being the scouts and skirmishers of the British Army. The 95th fought all across the world during the early 1800s, most famously at the Battle of Waterloo, where they helped take down Napoleon. All things come to an end, I suppose, because in 1818 the 95th was disbanded. A sad end to a glorious regiment. Number 6. The Lankinist. Until doing my research for this video, I never knew that the Lankinist existed, and let me tell you, I long for those days. This unit of German mercenaries made up the bulk of the Holy Roman Empire's fighting force from the late 15th to early 16th century, and wore a vibrant uniform that featured blue, red, yellow, black, and green fabrics that resulted in a baggy shirt, tight stockings, and a flat beret, usually featuring ostrich feathers, as well as small amulets and cuts. You might be very surprised to learn this, but the Lankinist were the bad boys of the 15th century, fighting everyone from the Ottomans to anyone who disagreed with them on religion. I just feel like I cannot put enough emphasis on this, that these guys were rough, contrary to what their uniforms suggest. In a time defined by instability, the Lankinist were able to implement themselves as a major faction in the Holy Roman Empire. And let me tell you, they were a beast on the battlefield. They fought primarily with pikes and positioned themselves in massive squares, sometimes up to 60 men deep, and proved time and time again they were not to be messed with. Eventually, everyone got tired of these weirdly dressed lunatics being the major source of stability, so the Lankinist were eventually replaced by a more disciplined German army. For almost all these uniforms that I'm talking about, I'm usually sad when I find out they were discontinued, but not these guys. They deserve to end just by looking like that. Number 7. The French Resistance. Though having no official uniform, those of the French Resistance looked amazing just by how ununiform they were. These guys were just regular civilians before the Nazis invaded, and they could only fight with whatever they could find or steal in order to try and set their country free. That shows why, in all the pictures you see of the Resistance, they are just wearing typical 1940s casual wear, along with a stolen German MP40. The only uniform thing about the Resistance was the armband they all wore in order to be classified as a legal combatant. This, in theory, gave them protection from being treated unfairly if captured. Of course, this is the Nazis we're talking about, so they did not always care for international rulings, but the Resistance had to try. Though having only about 30,000 members in a country of 40 million, the Resistance did a really good job of making things difficult for their occupiers, and for that reason, their uniform is one of my favorite ever. Number 9. The Zulu. These South African tribesmen gained their fame within the Western world by their massive victory against the British Army during the Battle of Isanawala, where 20,000 tribesmen destroyed an entire British column which consisted of 1,800 men. Their uniform featured a distinguishing headdress, which varied from regiment to regiment, and a large shield made of cowhide. Zulu warriors depended more on their speed and agility rather than armor. Though they sometimes used firearms, the Zulu were not that effective marksmen, so the majority of their fighting force were equipped with small spears. Though the Zulu put up a good fight, it was not enough to combat the might of the British Empire, and within 5 months they were defeated and Zululand was a British colony. But history will always remember the Zulu for how amazing their warriors looked, no matter the outcome. Number 10. The Rhodesian Army. About a year ago, I just randomly heard about some obscure Cold War country that fell apart in the 80s called Rhodesia. So on a whim, I decided to check it out. That is one of the greatest decisions of my entire life. I soon fell into the Rhodesian rabbit hole, and let me tell you, once you're in, there's no way you're going out. Apart from being a really interesting topic as a country itself, the Rhodesian military uniform has always stood out to me for being one of the coolest outfits to ever exist. One of the first things that strikes you when looking at pictures of Rhodesian soldiers is just how unprofessional they look. They all look as if they're going for a camping trip instead of fighting an intense bush war that can best be described as Africa's Vietnam. But believe me when I tell you that this is a carefully constructed uniform made perfectly for the environment and shows why the Rhodesian Army was one of the greatest fighting forces of the 20th century. In order to understand, you have to first know where Rhodesia is. Located in present-day Zimbabwe, the climate is hot. I mean really hot. The Rhodesians found out that by wearing less fabric, their fighting ability improved tremendously. One of the first things I noticed about Rhodesian uniforms is that many of them came with shorty shorts. That is not just an excellent fashion choice, but the shorts also allowed for more comfort and mobility while fighting out in the bush.
But my argument was, hey, I'm out there in the streets every day. I got to be able to move like a cheetah.
I also found out while doing my research that Rhodesians had a long relationship with shorts. Almost all outfits worn in daily life featured shorts, from school uniforms to businessmen who wore safari suits. It is also said that when Rhodesia, which was a British colony until its declared independence in 1965, sent troops to Europe during World War I, they all had shorts. Some soldiers didn't even wear the army-issued shorts, preferring to bring their running shorts from home. It wasn't just the shorts that made the Rhodesians unique, but also the fact that many wore tennis shoes, camo shirts, and not much else. Their army had figured out what many Western powers failed to realize, that when fighting small groups of guerrilla fighters in isolated areas, the less you brought with you, the less you had to carry and fight with. By wearing less clothing, a soldier was more camouflaged and able to move with the environment with ease. This allowed the Rhodesian army to hunt down their enemies by using quick, effective tactics. This was vastly different from the American approach to Vietnam, where Marines trudged through the jungle wearing 80 to 100 pounds of equipment, which caused them to be the hunted rather than the hunter. By being so adaptable, the Rhodesians were able to hold their country together for close to 15 years, with the entire world against them for not accepting a majority-rule government. It was not until 1980, after many of the white minority had left the country, that Rhodesia finally gave in and became Zimbabwe. Though many may argue about the ethics of Rhodesia, I think everyone can collectively agree on how awesome they all looked. So these are my top 10 favorite obscure military uniforms throughout history. I really hope you enjoyed.